Hello and welcome to the Online Course Creator Show. My name is Lou Blakely, your host. I'm so happy to have you here today. And if you've been listening for a while, welcome back. Today's episode is episode 81, and I am talking all about what kind of ROI or return on investment should you expect on your first launch. Now, I wanted to record this podcast because I really feel like there's a mentality out there around, I want to launch an online course, but will it be worth it? Will it be worth my time, the money I put into it, and all of that stuff? Am I going to see that return on investment? And if I don't, then I'm never going to launch again. And hopefully by the end of the episode, you'll understand why I believe that this viewpoint, or even really asking this question, is flawed. And it's not because the concept is flawed, it's because the online course business model actually works a little bit different to many other business models, and looking at the return on investment from your first launch is not necessarily the best measure of success. And in this episode, I'm going to talk about why. I also think in this industry, or the business model, there's this real tendency to really have a first launch mentality, and that be the driving decision maker behind everything that you do. And you're putting all of your eggs in this one basket of your first launch being an absolute blow-away hit for you to actually want to bother with this business model, where the actual fact is the true wins come from when you actually commit to this beyond the first launch. So that first launch mentality is not really helping you. It's actually probably hindering you from building the most amazing business model that's actually going to give you the long-term benefits. But if you're hinging everything off the success of your first launch, then you're probably never going to see those wins. Now, I absolutely am a huge advocate for wanting to get your money back and wanting to be successful and wanting your promotion or your launch to go really, really well. I completely understand that. However, I just think too much focus on that granular return on investment from your first launch as a way to really judge your success. So what I've seen people do is look at what it's costing them to create the online course. So it could be that you're signing up for software, which actually, of course, you will need some kind of software. It could be that you are outsourcing some of the launching process so that you can actually, because you don't have time. It could be that you've hired a coach who is helping you through the process. So you've got all of these costs going into it, right? Now, we've also got this investment of time that we need to talk about. And this is where I believe the return on investment and hinging it on the success of your first course, why this doesn't really work. Okay, so when we do a first online course launch, I am a huge advocate for pre-selling. So what we're doing is we're actually going through the launching process. We're selling places inside of our course. And then once we have those people, we are then investing our time to actually create the course. And the reason that we do that is because we actually want to validate that people are willing to pay for and buy our offer before we spend all of that time, because your time is super valuable, right? So there's no doubt there's a heap of time that needs to go into a course launch. And you could say, well, my time is worth $300 an hour because that's what I would be getting paid if I was showing up with a client and coaching them for an hour. So maybe you charge $300 an hour. It could be that you provide a service to someone, like a done-for-you service, and your hourly rate, to run the back end of your business is like $150 an hour or something like that. So you could say, well, I'm going to spend 20 hours on creating my launch, which is probably not really enough. But say we're going to say my time budget is 20 hours at a rate of $300, which is what maybe that's your hourly rate, by 20 hours. So that's $6,000. Now, all of a sudden, you are saying, I must make $6,000 to get a return for this launch to have been worth it. And I'm saying worth it with the inverted commas, right? With my, I don't even know what that sign's called when you hold up your two fingers and anyway. So all of a sudden you're putting this pressure that you must have a $6,000 launch to even break even. Then you've got the software costs. Then you've got a cost of hiring like a VA to help you schedule emails or create some Canva graphics or anything like that. So all of a sudden you are demanding that this online course launch achieves this in order to break even. And if it doesn't, then we're going to deem it a failure. And this is really what I want to talk to you today about, because I feel like this is very flawed. And the reason that it is flawed is because if you don't hit that mark where you break even, or even if you do and maybe you have a $10,000 launch on your first launch, depending on your audience size, is all relevant, all like relative, right? So is that a good result? Depends on your audience size. But, you could say, well, that wasn't really worth my time because I showed up, I spent $6,000 on this thing, I made $10,000, and that means I only made $4,000. Doesn't really feel worth it to me. And then what I find is the next stage from this is that you do go ahead and create the course, of course, because you've had if you've sold $10,000 worth of an online course, you're probably going to create it, right? So you then invest the extra time to create the course, which is all well and good. But then what happens is you've got this mindset that it wasn't worth it, so you don't launch it again. And you say to people, it just wasn't really worth my time. And you've got this amazing course and product sitting there that actually nobody ever gets to benefit from that again, and you don't get to see the true benefits of where that course could take you because you've decided it wasn't worth it. So it's a really interesting idea, actually, gauging the success of your launch based on return on investment. I actually think there's way better ways to gauge your success, usually on conversion rate focused metrics, rather than looking at it from a return on investment. But in the business world, return on investment, especially outside of the online world, is what people really kind of go to more often than not. So instead of looking at it from what's my return on investment and time going to be in my first launch, I actually recommend that you write off the time investment and just look at it from a financial investment, like what you invested for this particular launch. I actually don't want you to include coaching or strategic help that you got for that first launch in your calculations. And the reason why is because the skills that you learned as a result of doing that work with a coach or whatever, it actually becomes an asset of yours that you can use again and again and again. It's not actually just based on that one launch. So you can see where I'm going with this. The time investment in any help that you've had from a coach or a course or whatever it is that you've used to help you get this first launch happening, they're actually investments in the long term, right? So you can't really judge the return on investment of your first launch. So to recap, when you're looking at any kind of calculation, I recommend you don't count the time investment and you don't count any strategic help, coaching, that kind of thing that you've had to make this launch work. And you give yourself a 12-month goal based on 3 or 4 launches, like 1 launch a quarter, and set some goals that you want to hit in that time, and then look at what you want in terms of return over that longer term, because that's where the real benefits come from, right? There is going to be so much time that you put into this in the first time you launch and the first time you create your product, because ideally it's really the only time you create your product. And then the stuff that you spend the time on in the first launch becomes an asset that you get to benefit from financially again and again and again. Sure, you do have to action launches again. You have to go through the process. You follow your strategy. But you're going to be able to save time in future launches by reusing what you created and what worked well from that first launch. Okay, so again, that's an asset. You're saving time the second time, the third time, the fourth time you launch. And you also have created the product, and it just really devastates me actually to see people spending all of this time creating a course and then they launch it once, and for whatever reason they feel like it wasn't worth it, and it just goes into their digital library, never to be seen again. It's actually the biggest waste. And I do understand that there's a lot of work that goes into a launch the first time you do it. It can be a lot. But if you stick at it and keep launching, your results are just going to get higher and higher and higher, and what you invested is going to get lower and lower and lower, especially once you're at the phase where, you've been doing this for a long time, you're well known for what you do, and your course becomes in demand. You are like the go-to expert in your space, which is the end goal, right? That, for that longer term period, you should completely be focusing on. That's when you step into that $1 million online course realm. The reality is you're not going to get there if you're hinging every single success on that very first launch. It's just not how it works in this business model. And I understand that the world works that way and the business world likes to think that way, but I definitely encourage you to look at it from a point of view that suits this business model and what it really entails, rather than following the guidelines of like an accountant who doesn't really understand this business model, because that is actually where I find a lot of the stuff coming from. So there are more upfront costs the first time around, both in your time and in the strategic help or whatever you need to actually get this off the ground. But over time, you're going to see that economies of scale. I'm bringing back my economy studies from high school. But, where it becomes like the tipping point in terms of volume of sales is so worth it compared to the small cost that you kind of looking back on in the rearview mirror because it's behind you, right? This is also another point I want to make here is I do encourage you to try and keep your costs fairly low on your first launch, because the purpose of the first launch is simply validating that people want to buy your course. So it may be that you do need to get coaching, strategic help, buy a course. 100% I'm behind that. Obviously, that's what I offer people. But generally, from what I see, if you know you need that, then you're not really going to get off the starting blocks without that, which is completely normal in this space because you don't know what you don't know. I think that's a worthy investment. You're also going to need some software, but I would encourage you to keep costs low in terms of going out and getting brand photography and maybe a rebrand before you launch a new website and hiring a copywriter. You absolutely don't or shouldn't invest in that in your first launch. I think keeping those costs in check is really important. I actually recorded a whole episode on this topic, which is episode 73. I'm going to link it for you below, and it's called What You Need to Invest in for Your First Online Course, Digital Product or Launch, and What You Don't. So if you want to dive into my recommendations there in full, I recommend to go and listen to that episode. But I do recommend that first launch you keep your costs in check, you don't blow it out. Instead of looking at it from a return on investment, you're simply wanting to make sure that people want your offer. And then it's in those subsequent launches where you really make the returns, where you really get the benefit and you can really scale up from there, and the world is your oyster at that point. So I hope you enjoyed this episode today. I hope that if you are looking at the online course, the first launch situation, the return on investment, and you felt quite skeptical about the whole thing, I hope I helped shift your mindset in some way. And I just really hope that this episode was helpful to you. And if I can get more people past that first launch and launching over a 12-month period consistently, then I have done my job. It's actually a bit of a mission for me, because I feel like way too many people do one launch and give up when there's so much potential if they just keep going. So that's it from me today. If you haven't jumped on the waitlist for Moneymakers yet, then I highly recommend to do so, because I have an amazing offer coming just to the waitlist in early September. So make sure you're on there. You can sign up at loublakely.com/waitlist. I'd love to see you there. And I'd love to see you in the next episode as well. See you later. Thanks, course creators and go-getters. You're incredible, and I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you haven't done so already, make sure you hit subscribe in your podcast app so you don't miss an episode. If you'd like to find out more about what I offer, head across to loublakely.com. See you next time.